Hi, it's Laura from 99.9 WFRE. I'm here with Troy Skinner, and he might look familiar to you because he's actually an account executive for WFRE and WFMD. Not just that though, you're also the host of WFMD's Frederick Forum right now, and as well as the Frederick Faith Debate. But outside of working for our stations, you do some other things, don't you?
Yeah, people who know me well come to know that I'm actually the pastor, or have been the pastor of a couple of different churches over the years. Currently a pastor of Household of Faith in Christ. It's a kind of a startup house church right now, church plant.
Yeah. So how did you get your start?
Well, it's not unusual to hear people that get into the pastorate to feel, when they're younger, at some point in their life, they feel a strong tug towards the ministry. I was no different in that regard. And kind of a turning point for me was about almost 20 years ago now. One of my pastors pulled me aside and said, "Hey, have you ever thought about being a pastor?" And I said, "It's funny you should ask, because for a long time I've kind of thought about it." And he said, "I think you'd be good at it. I think you should consider it. You and your wife should pray about it." And so that started me on the path. I went to seminary, got my master's degree. It's called an MDiv, Master of Divinity. And it took me a while because I was going to school while working. So I was only able to go to school part-time, but finally finished that, and here I am talking to you.
Yeah, exciting. So what do you think is the best part of that job for you?
I think the best part is having a sense of feeling like the work that you're doing has a real meaning and purpose beyond just the here and now.
Yeah.
Knowing that you're affecting lives in an everlasting way, not just for the next 20, 50, 70, 90 years they have left on the planet. You're trying to help them there too, but it's a bigger purpose, a bigger calling. And I'm a huge fan of the idea of there being truth, and being an advocate for truth is rather fulfilling. It's hard to make sure that you're being honest with the biblical text and honest with your own understanding to figure out what the truth is. But then once you get to a place where you feel like you've arrived at this is the truth, it's really fulfilling to share that truth with others.
Wow, it's got to be pretty rewarding too.
Yeah, I've seen people's lives change pretty dramatically. I've seen some people's lives that refused to change at all, or maybe change for the worse in spite of the best efforts. But when you see somebody's life change in a pretty dramatic way, and you've watched the transformation play out over years, that is really cool.
I'm sure there might be some hardships though along the way. What do you think is the hardest part?
Well, there's a couple of things. One, every pastor has a challenge with their flock. You're trying to shepherd the people that God has given you to be responsible for their souls, kind of thing, to put a big theological idea around that. And people, we have stubborn streaks, independent streaks. We don't like to be led. We don't like to be shepherded. As much as people will say that we want a good pastor who will invest in us and shepherd us, our human instinct is to not want that. And so that overcome that hurdle and get people to allow you to help them can be a challenge. And then bigger picture, the climate we have right now is the American Christian church is in a bit of a crisis right now. And so you can feel a little bit on an island. Those who are advocating for biblical truth are more and more increasingly in the minority, and you can feel rather isolated and lonely. So you don't have your people that always want to be pastored, and you've got your colleagues that aren't even on the same page with you, biblically and theologically. It can be a lonely thing.
If somebody wanted to get into this, what would you say to them? What would you recommend?
Well, the first thing is to make sure that you are properly identifying what's called an inward call. You feel like you've got a call on your life, and I'm not so sure I go this far, but there have been some really heavyweight theologians over the years that advocate for this, and they're smarter than me. So those heavyweights would say that if you can imagine yourself doing anything else, don't do it. But if you can't imagine your life without preaching the good news, without studying the Bible and sharing that truth from the pulpit on a regular basis, if you can't imagine living without doing that, you should pursue it. If you can imagine living without doing that, you probably shouldn't. So that's the first step. The second thing really is kind of affirmation. Like I mentioned in my story, I had a pastor about 20 years ago say, hey, you ever thought about being a pastor? And I've had other instances like that too, where people have suggested to me that, hey, a pastor could be something you should think about. Yeah. So you have people affirming you, maybe even you're not even soliciting it. They just kind of mention to you, hey. Or you start getting put in positions of teaching and leadership where you're asked repeatedly to lead Bible studies and prayer groups and things like that, and maybe asked to consider becoming an elder at your church or some other leader. That might be an affirmation you're looking for. And then the last, you want to, maybe leading up to this, is you want to be prepared and get trained up. Like I said, the church is in a crisis right now because a lot of pastors aren't properly trained up. So it doesn't mean you have to go to seminary. But if you do go to seminary, you want to go to the right ones. Some of them aren't worth anything really anymore these days. Or you want to have a really good training program within your church context that can get you to where you need to be, so you know that when you're shepherding and leading people, you're shepherding and leading them properly. And so then when all that has happened, the last step really is to have an outward call. Somebody else says, hey, we would like you to be an elder here. We would like you to be a pastor for our church. So it begins with the inward call. You want to confirm that with some external kinds of things and some training things. And then if nobody calls you to be a pastor, everything else can be in line. But if nobody calls you to be a pastor, then maybe everything else was misunderstood.
Wow, interesting. Well, Troy, thank you so much for joining us. And
it's a thrill. I'm a huge fan.
Yes.
This is late night Laura.
I'm a huge fan of you as well.
I've been known to stay up late at night just to hear her talk on the radio.
It's true. It's very true. Well, thank you so much for joining us for our virtual career day. You can check out all the interviews on our websites, WFRE.com and WFMD.com.